This is the single best theory I've ever created, and I'll explain why Lightyear is the most important movie in the entire Pixar theory. In Lightyear, we're told that this movie tells the story of the hero that inspired the toy, the movie that Andy saw that made him want a Buzz Lightyear toy. But what if I told you that that wasn't entirely true? When you try to fit this into the Pixar theory, the idea that all Pixar movies take place on a shared timeline, you assume this one is the most insignificant. You just accept that it's a movie and and that's the end of it. But before we get ahead of ourselves, let's go back in the timeline a little bit to the 1940s. The government creates the National Supers Agency and employs highly trained supers to roam free, stopping crime in Metroville. We can see that the government has far more advanced technology than we had in our 1940s. But you might notice that average citizens still use technology that you would expect from the 1940s. People lived mostly normal lives, and this advanced technology was only really used by government. People eventually lost trust in the supers, and the government issued the Superhero Relocation Act. With the supers now gone, the government looked at other ways they could put their technology to use and eventually achieve the capitalist society that we see in WALL-E. But before they could reach that point, they had to invest in space travel. After The Incredibles, the next movie in the Pixar timeline is Toy Story. Now in the year 1995, a Buzz Lightyear toy becomes extremely popular. And up until Lightyear released, I would have thought nothing of it. But now Pixar releases a movie claiming to be the definitive origin story of Buzz Lightyear, and considering where we left off in the story with the government investing in space travel and all that, you can't get me to believe that this movie is completely fiction. In fact, we actually see a lot of the technology from the supers used in Lightyear. We can see teleportation similar to Void and Jack-Jack. We can see Violet's power of invisibility used in their suits, the same way Edna created a suit that turns invisible when Violet does. If you pay attention to the language used in the first Toy Story, it seems almost as if it's alluding to Buzz Lightyear being a real person. The most clear example of this is when Woody says,
"You actually think you're the Buzz Lightyear?"
And also during the Buzz Lightyear commercial, it says,
"The world's greatest superhero, now the world's greatest toy!"
Making the Space Rangers sound like the heroes for pioneering space travel to eventually lead to this. So it seems to me that Buzz is a famous astronaut within the Pixar universe. After all, Andy has a drawing of Buzz on the moon, possibly hinting to him being the first man on the moon. Now we have to figure out when this would even be taking place. In Toy Story 2, the prospector references Sputnik, a satellite launched by the Soviet Union in 1957. This was the first man-made object to be sent into space. So it has to be after 1957, but before 1995 when Toy Story takes place. It shouldn't be too long after The Incredibles because, like I said earlier, the government is trying to go from this to this as quickly as possible. I would say 1970 sounds about right. That will be our starting point. Buzz and his team travel 4.2 million light years from Earth and land on the planet Takani Prime to mine resources. But as you would know if you watched the movie, Buzz crashes the ship and leaves everyone stranded with no way of returning back to Earth. When they don't return home, this is what causes Buzz to become famous back on Earth. Meaning that after the humans decided to stay on Takani Prime, there was a human civilization other than the one on Earth. And doesn't that sound familiar? That's right, I believe the civilization from Onward to be the planet of Takani Prime from Lightyear. Let me explain. In Onward, it's explained that long ago, the world was full of magic. Eventually, over time, the magic was replaced by technology. And now it makes sense why. Although not shown in the movie, the elves, unicorns, and other fantasy creatures that live on this planet more likely than not are hiding from the humans. Commander Burnside builds a ray shield to keep the critters out, possibly referring to the critters that we see in Onward. Another thing that needs to be addressed are the two moons on the planet from Onward. We never actually get a good shot of the moons of Takani Prime and Lightyear, so they're there, but we just can't see them. In the vending machine, you can see Poultry Palace from both Onward and Toy Story 4, further showing influence from Earth. But this next bit of evidence undoubtedly proves that the planet from Onward is Takani Prime. Look at this shot from Lightyear, and now look at this shot from Onward. This is the exact same area with the exact same trees. These are the aggressive vines in Lightyear. This is the same path that Buzz and Alicia walked through centuries earlier. That's why there are ancient relics all around this area in particular. Even where Buzz gets arrested is the same area where Ian and Barley were running from the cops in Onward. Eventually, the humans shared their technology with the fantasy creatures, and centuries later, that's how we get to Onward. In Onward, there's a magical gem known as the Phoenix Gem. This gem has magical properties, and Barley tells us that there are very few of these gems left. This is because Star Command mined them until there were very few of them left. The whole reason they landed on Takani Prime in the first place was to mine resources. But what did they want this gem for? They wanted this gem because this is one of the most powerful objects in the entire Pixar universe. Its magical properties can be used for time travel. If you look at the elements used to make the hyperspace crystal, it's made from 15% of this orange element. This is the Phoenix Gem. And that's why Star Command wanted it. They were going to bring it back to Earth to test its capabilities. This explains how in the distant future, monsters were able to time travel back to the time of the humans. It's all because of a Phoenix Gem. And speaking of Monsters Inc., see this? This explains how the government started harvesting emotions as a power source before they ran out of fossil fuels. But that's besides the point. The first time that Buzz tries to orbit the sun, he travels 4 years in time. The second time, about another 4 years, putting us at 1978. Then 1993, 2003, 2031, 2038, and finally another 22 years, leaving us in 2060, where the bulk of the film takes place. This is the general timeline, give or take a few years here and there. In the final jump of 22 years, when Buzz reaches hyperspeed, this is where the timeline splits and now there are 2 Buzz Lightyears, one which becomes Zurg. Except the only problem is, he's not actually Zurg. If you pay attention to his backstory, he actually went centuries into the future and stole technology. The robots only know how to say Zurg because they were made to serve the real Zurg. This older Buzz isn't the real Zurg. If you recall, in Toy Story, Zurg is always referred to as the evil Emperor Zurg. But this Buzz from the future definitely isn't an emperor. He just stole Zurg's technology and tried to travel back to 1970 to fix his mistake. But the hyperspeed crystal burned out before he could go back that far, and he arrived in 2060. But then who is the evil Emperor Zurg? He said he traveled centuries. That would be the time period of WALL-E, when the humans were gone from Earth. And who's the only other evil communist dictator in the Pixar universe that could possibly be looked at as an emperor? Yes, I'm saying that I believe Shelby Forthright, the global CEO of By and Large, to be the original Zurg. The humans left Earth in 2105. Zurg said he traveled centuries, so that means Shelby Forthright would have been long dead by this point. In older Buzz's flashback, you can see that this B&L ship is completely abandoned, leaving it for older Buzz to take for himself no problem. He then used the hyperspeed crystal to travel back to 1960. In the movie, we know that this ship arrived a week ago, but then you're left to wonder, what was the Zurg suit meant to be used for by and Large? In WALL-E, all of the robots' names are acronyms, such as WALL-E, Waste Allocation Load Lifter Earth Class, or EVE, Extraterrestrial Vegetation Evaluator. The same is true in Lightyear, with robots such as Eric. I would assume Zurg would also be an acronym for something. So with all of By and Large's robots used to make people's lives easier, this one looks like it was meant to do the opposite. My guess would be that this was used by Shelby Forthright as an intimidation tactic, because before the humans became mindless consumers hundreds of years later, there were most likely people who tried to rebel against By and Large, but feared the evil Emperor Zurg. But now there's just one loose thread left to tie. If the Zurg suit wasn't created until 2105, then how is there a Zurg toy in Toy Story 2? That's the question I'll be answering in my next theory. But for now, why don't you go check out my video about the most minor named characters in Cars. Thank you for watching, and bye!